I, Carl Sagan, died at age 62. Not of old age, not of an accident, from cells that forgot to stop. Most people think cancer is a single disease. It's not. What killed Sagan was myelodysplasia, a word that sounds like a spaceship malfunction but describes something far more personal. Your bone marrow is supposed to be like a factory. It's supposed to produce red blood cells to carry oxygen, white blood cells to fight infection, platelets to stop bleeding, 3 assembly lines working perfectly, billions of cells every day, your whole life. Sagan's factory started to malfunction. In 1994, doctors found it. The bone marrow was producing cells that looked almost right but didn't work. Imagine a car factory where every 10th vehicle comes off the production line with 3 wheels. The chassis is there, the engine is running, but it can't be driven. That's myelodysplastic syndrome. The plan broke down. He didn't feel it at first. That's the cruelty of bone marrow disease. You don't wake up one morning unable to breathe. It creeps. Sagan probably noticed fatigue first, the kind where climbing stairs feels like hiking uphill, then bruises that appeared without impact. Small red dots on his skin called petechiae pinpoint hemorrhages from a platelet count dropping below what the body needs. The diagnosis came from a bone marrow biopsy. They drilled into his hip bone and pulled out a core sample. Under the microscope, pathologists saw dysplasia. Cells with irregular nuclei, cells stuck in adolescence, unable to mature. In a healthy person, less than 5% of bone marrow cells are blasts, the immature precursors. Sagan's marrow had more. Myelodysplasia sits on a spectrum. On one end, you have low-risk disease, where people live years with transfusions. On the other end, high-risk disease that transforms into acute myeloid leukemia within months. Sagan's case leaned toward the dangerous side. Treatment in the mid-1990s was limited. The only real cure was a bone marrow transplant, replacing his entire blood cell production system with someone else's. Find a donor whose tissue type matches. Destroy his existing marrow with high-dose chemo and radiation. Then infuse the donor cells and pray they engraft. Sagan's sister was tested, not a match. They searched the donor registry. In 1995, that registry was smaller than today. The odds of finding an unrelated match depend on your ethnicity, but even in the best case, it's not guaranteed. They found someone. April 1995. Sagan checked into Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle. They gave him chemotherapy that killed his immune system. They irradiated his entire body. Then they transfused the donor's bone marrow through an IV line. The cells found their way to his bones and started growing. For a while, it worked. His blood counts came back. New cells, genetically someone else's, doing the job his own had failed at. He went home, wrote, worked on Contact, the film adaptation of his novel. But here's what most people don't know. A bone marrow transplant doesn't just replace your blood, it replaces your immune system completely. Every antibody you spent a lifetime building, gone. You are immunologically a newborn in an adult body. And sometimes the new immune system looks around and decides the body it's living in is the enemy. Graft versus host disease, the donor cells attack. Skin, liver, gut, lungs, anything they perceive as foreign. Mild cases cause rashes, severe cases are fatal. Sagan developed it. His doctors gave him immunosuppressants to calm the attack, but those same drugs made him vulnerable to infections. 2 years after the transplant, the myelodysplasia came back. The cancer returned in his own cells, not the donor's, his. Somewhere in his body, a pocket of original bone marrow had survived the chemotherapy and radiation. Those cells had been dormant, waiting, and when the immunosuppressants weakened his system, they woke up. Relapse after transplant is a death sentence. You've already used the nuclear option. There's no second factory to borrow. His doctors tried another transplant anyway, a second donor, another round of obliterating his marrow, but his body couldn't take it. The pneumonia that killed him wasn't really about bacteria in his lungs. It was about a system so compromised that even harmless microbes became predators. The 20th of December, 1996. He died in his sleep. But let's back up, because the question isn't just what killed him, it's why his bone marrow failed in the first place. We don't know. That's the honest answer. Myelodysplasia has known risk factors: prior chemotherapy, radiation exposure, benzene, but most cases are idiopathic, no clear cause. Sagan never had cancer treatment before his diagnosis. He wasn't a smoker, he didn't work in a chemical plant, just bad luck at the molecular level. Here's what happens inside the cell. Your DNA has a proofreading system. Every time a cell divides, enzymes check the copied genome for errors and fix them. It's absurdly accurate, 1 mistake per billion base pairs. But bone marrow cells divide constantly. You produce 200 billion red blood cells every day. Even with perfect proofreading, errors accumulate. Most errors do nothing. Some are immediately fatal to the cell. But occasionally, an error hits a critical gene, one that controls cell division or the self-destruct program cells use when they detect damage. Sagan's bone marrow had accumulated enough hits. In myelodysplasia, chromosome 5 and chromosome 7 are frequently damaged. These chromosomes carry genes that regulate how stem cells mature into functional blood cells. Lose part of chromosome 7, and your cells get stuck in neutral. They proliferate but never grow up. There's also something called clonal evolution. One mutated cell outcompetes its neighbors. It divides faster, or it resists normal death signals. Over months or years, its descendants take over the bone marrow. You end up with billions of cells all carrying the same genetic mistake. That's not leukemia yet, but it's one step away. Sagan's disease was progressing toward acute myeloid leukemia. In AML, the bone marrow fills with blasts, immature cells that never differentiate. They crowd out normal production. Your red cell count plummets, your platelet count drops, and you bruise from a handshake. Your white cells are abundant but useless. The body becomes a war zone. And here's something people don't realize about bone marrow failure. It's not like losing a kidney where the other one compensates. Bone marrow is distributed throughout your skeleton, but it functions as one organ. When it fails, there's no backup. Transfusions buy time. Sagan received hundreds of units of blood and platelets between diagnosis and death, but transfusions are a Band-Aid. They don't fix the factory. They just import products from someone else's. The transplant was supposed to fix the factory. It did for a while. But the human body is not a car where you can swap the engine and drive away. Stem cells have to migrate through the bloodstream to the marrow spaces and nest into specific locations. If they nest wrong, they die. If they divide too slowly, the patient dies from infection before counts recover. Then there's the immune system piece. Donor T cells come along with the stem cells. Those T cells are trained to recognize the donor's tissue as self. When they enter Sagan's body, some decided his cells were invaders. That's graft versus host disease. His skin likely thickened. His liver enzymes probably climbed. He may have developed dry eyes and dry mouth. Every day was a balance between suppressing the attack and leaving enough immune function to prevent infection. He got pneumonia anyway, probably pneumocystis or cytomegalovirus, infections that reactivate in immunosuppressed patients. His lungs filled with fluid. Oxygen levels dropped. They intubated him, put him on a ventilator. But when your immune system is gone and your bone marrow is failing, mechanical breathing just prolongs the inevitable. Anne Druyan, his wife, was there. She described him as peaceful at the end. Maybe the morphine helped. Maybe he'd already made peace with it. Sagan spent his life thinking about death, the death of stars, the death of species, the eventual heat death of the universe. He knew he was temporary, but his death wasn't poetic. It was cellular, mechanical. A cascade of systems failing because one organ couldn't do its job. No metaphor. Just biology running into its limits. So what do we take from this? Not inspiration. That would be cheap. Sagan didn't die beautifully. He died the way everyone with bone marrow failure dies, gradually losing function, organs shutting down, consciousness fading under sedation. There's no poetry in septic shock, but there's honesty. He would have hated a sanitized version of his death. The disease didn't care about his contributions to science. Cancer doesn't read your CV. It doesn't grant exceptions for genius. That's the point. We're all matter. Atoms arranged in patterns complex enough to be aware of themselves, but still just atoms following physical law. When the pattern breaks down, consciousness stops. No escape hatch. You are your body. When it fails, you fail. Sagan believed that and found it liberating rather than depressing. If this life is all we get, then it matters intensely. Every moment of awareness is precious because it's temporary. We create meaning by choosing what to do with our brief time as organized matter. He chose to explain the cosmos, to take astronomy and physics and biology and translate it into language anyone could understand. Cosmos reached 500 million people. 500 million minds exposed to the idea that we're made of star stuff, that the universe is comprehensible. How many of those people became scientists because of him? How many looked up at the night sky and felt connected to something larger? You can't measure that impact. It propagates forward through culture and time in ways no single person can track. That's what persists. Not his body, which was cremated, not even his exact ideas, some of which have been superseded, but the impulse he spread. The sense that understanding matters, that we have a responsibility as conscious beings to figure out where we are. His bone marrow failed. His immune system turned against him. Infections overwhelmed him. But the pattern he created in other minds, that's still propagating. Think about that. A man whose cells betrayed him, whose body fell apart decades too soon, and yet his influence is arguably stronger now than when he was alive. Students who were children in 1996 are now researchers. The Planetary Society is still advocating for exploration. His books are still in print. The matter that was Carl Sagan has dispersed. The atoms that formed his neurons are in soil now, maybe in plants, maybe in rainwater. The carbon that built his cells is cycling through the biosphere. In a few centuries, molecules that were once part of his brain will be scattered across the planet. But the information he encoded in books and films that persists, it's a different kind of immortality. Not personal, he's not watching from anywhere. There's no afterlife where he's aware of his continued impact. He's gone. But the patterns he created continue to affect reality. We are all temporary patterns. Some patterns are simple, water flowing downhill, patterns that last seconds or centuries but leave no trace. Other patterns are complex, life, consciousness, culture. These patterns copy themselves, evolve, interact. Sagan was a particularly complex pattern, one that understood its own nature as a pattern, understood that patterns end but can create other patterns before they do. So he spent his life encoding information in his students, his books, his shows, knowing those encodings would outlast his physical form. That's all we can do. Leave patterns in other minds, teach what we've learned, create beauty or knowledge or kindness that persists after we're gone. Not because it makes us immortal, we're not, but because the patterns we create affect what comes next. Sagan's death was cellular failure, mutations accumulating, repair mechanisms overwhelmed, systems shutting down, entirely physical, entirely explainable, but his life was pattern creation, taking the mystery of the cosmos and making it comprehensible, taking human ignorance and chipping away at it. He died at 62. Too young, decades of work left undone. The universe didn't care. Cancer doesn't negotiate. And yet, he got 62 years as a conscious arrangement of atoms. 62 years to look out at the cosmos and understand it, to share that understanding, to love and be loved. Most matter never gets that. Most atoms spend eternity in stars or gas clouds, never organized into patterns complex enough to be aware, never experiencing anything. We get decades. Decades of awareness, of experience, of the ability to learn and create and connect. That's the actual prize. The only prize on offer. Sagan knew that. His bone marrow killed him, but for 62 years he was alive, conscious, part of the universe understanding itself. And when his cells finally failed, when consciousness faded, he didn't transcend his biology. He ended, but the patterns he created continue. In every student who reads Pale Blue Dot, in every researcher who looks at the stars and wonders, in every parent who teaches their kid that science is how we know what's true. Matter becomes aware of itself for a brief time, then returns to being matter. That's the cycle. Sagan completed it. You're completing it right now. And when you end, the question won't be whether you transcended biology. You won't. The question will be what patterns you left behind. What did you teach? What did you create? What darkness did you push back? That's the only immortality available to conscious matter. Use it while you're here.